me. I'll just actually, I'm kind of an expressive.
Okay, so do you want me to go like here?
Perfect.
And then people are already trying to enter, so I'm not gonna.
Let them in.
Yeah, and then we'll turn.
Oh, you're people in the waiting room.
Hey.
Just wait.
Is this, haven't even come to a Tuesday meeting yet since they've been
Oh,
back
you
in
have
person.
to.
Is this where,
This is where good magic happens.
Yeah.
this is how it's set up?
Hi. How are you? Great. Long time no see.
Yeah.
Good to see you.
Nice meeting you guys.
And then, do you want to share your screen immediately?
Yeah.
Okay, then let me just open the slides up.
Hey, is it
Manny.
Manny? I was like, I think it's Manny, but I don't know with the mask. Okay, I haven't seen you in so long.
Yeah, for sure.
How have you
You've
Good.
been doing great.
Thanks.
It's been like about a year since you've been KW now, or?
Not even switched over in March.
Oh, yeah, because I met you in October, or like.
Was it?
that
Was
summer, and then took us to new house. thing.
yeah. Was I still pregnant?
Yeah, and you were,
So maybe it was spring. Cause she came in June.
okay, yeah, it must have been.
Yeah, I think it was Bayview at the little. Was it the little house
Mhm.
on Adams?
I-
Maybe.
Yeah.
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 Did your buyers get it?
No,
Did they write?
they did, I think he counted with us or something, but it was like the first house that they looked at, first house that they put an offer, I'm like, hey, if you guys wanna accept this counter, we pretty much can get it. And I think they're just like, no, I think we would have stayed over.
Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, the
But it's okay, they
accepting,
found a really nice house. and
you
let me
want to
know close
accept
to
it?
it.
I can.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah,
good.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. Yeah.
That was one of your investments, right?
No, that was the one. That's where I first met you.
Yeah,
Oh, yes, that was our flip
yeah.
on Crawford.
Probably.
Sorry, I was thinking about the other one. Yes, it was our flip. And so they did find a different one though. That was a year and a half. That was 2 years ago.
Maybe it was before you were.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, because I ran into a different house and you were pregnant. That time.
Yes, that was this
And I
year.
think that-
Oh,
that's
sorry.
just-
Hi, everyone.
I say bye, you daddy.
All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to investment training with Abby Wall. I'm super excited to have someone who's been doing this so successfully for a while pour into all of you about this topic. I get tons of questions every day about people wanting to do this, and Abby and her husband have been doing this for about 4 years. They did their first 2 years of it, not even living in the same country as their investment properties. So I don't want to give away too much of her story, but I'm really excited to have Abby here to talk to us all about how we can grow tons of passive income through the opportunities and investments in real estate. So Abby Wall.
Thanks, Mandy. Hi, everyone, and hi, everyone here. So we're going to talk over, let's just jump to that line. My slides are not super fancy. I'm going to warn you right now. If I can figure out how to advance. Whoops, we're going too fast. Okay, so we're going to talk over today, obviously about investing in real estate. How many people, I'm going to see if I can, how many people have already bought an investment property? Anyone? Yes. Okay. Anyone online? I'm going to see how I can see the chat. Okay. Or have you helped a client buy an investment property? No. Okay.
People have helped.
Okay. So today we're not really going to be talking over like contracts or how to buy real estate, because you all know how to buy and sell real estate. We're going to talk about more of the investing piece and some
In on this
reviews. As you dive
investment
into
business planning thing,
real estate, you'll find out there's a million ways.
and my meeting with the girls with kids,
A million different things to different people. It just depends on who you ask. So for us, passive income is
not
money
feeling
that's
anything. He
working
just
when we're
tested
not
positive.
working. That's how we, like, our simple definition of passive income. Like, as a realtor, right, if you stop working, if you
Really?
stop going to show houses, if you stop writing contracts, income stops coming in. So we kind of talk about that like as a treadmill. If you get off the treadmill, then like you're not going to make any more money. So how like to build some passive income that's going to keep working for you even when you're not actively working. That's how we define it. So we're going to talk over some of our story. We're going to talk over some just basic definitions and some vocab that's used in the investing space. We're going to briefly talk over how to run the numbers. That's another thing. If you ask 100 investors how to run their numbers on a property, you'll probably get almost 100 different ways to run your numbers. So I'll share how we do it. But again, just take it with a grain of salt. Like you might find something that works a little bit better for you. And then I'll go over an example purchase that we've made, and then some resources to send you on your way. Okay, so this is my fam, and these are all the properties that we currently own. They are all in Milwaukee. We bought our first one in the spring of 2018, and we actually bought it while we were living overseas in Poland. We were traveling country to country for about 7 years, and my husband was playing professional basketball, and that's why we were living abroad. And my husband read the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, which is going to be mentioned later in a little short book list. And he read that and told me, hey, I think we should buy an investment property. And I'm usually game for any good idea. So I'm like, sure, that sounds fun. And we bought our first duplex here in Milwaukee about 6 months later. Fun fact is my husband had never been to Milwaukee when we bought that duplex. But I was pregnant with our second, and he was in the middle of the season, so neither of us could travel back. So we had some family that, like my parents drove up from Iowa and joined the home inspector. But we bought it, yeah, basically without ever seeing it in person. And we bought it in Bayview. We came back that summer, we renovated it ourselves, and then we put it up on Airbnb and went back overseas. So that's kind of how we got started, was more in the Airbnb side of things. And then we permanently moved to Milwaukee at the end of 2019, decided to do real estate full time. He retired and started buying more properties. I got licensed and we jumped in. So since then, we now have purchased, we have 8 properties that we call buy and holds. Buy and holds are a property that you buy and you hold for a long time versus a flip where you buy and you flip it, you renovate it and you turn around and sell it. So we currently own 9 properties, one of which will be a flip that we'll sell in the spring. The other 8 are buy and holds that we will hold on to for a long time. Part of our strategy, which we'll go into later, is we buy properties that need a ton of work. So this is what my husband is now doing full time. Again, like this part of it is not the passive part. So we've chosen a method that on the front end is not very passive because we are spending a lot of time and money renovating properties. We'll go over more of those details of how we're doing that in a bit, but then when it becomes passive for us is when it gets rented out. We have a fully renovated property and then we have rents coming in every month. One thing that we have loved about it and one thing that really drew us to stay in Milwaukee is there are several properties throughout the city. I'm sure you all have been in several of them that need quite a bit of work and love and attention. And so for us, it has been a good fit. If not only are we creating a beautiful home for someone else to live in and enjoy, and it's safe, and like that's very rewarding, but we're also investing in our future and creating passive income. So for us, it's really been about both. Like we are transforming these houses, we're transforming someone's story of who gets to live in them. Usually we get to know a lot of the neighbors. They're thanking us for taking this junky, usually vacant property and making it beautiful. And then we get to have really great tenants who are getting to experience a really beautiful unit to live in. And then we'll talk over the numbers too. So for us, part of our story and vision is yes, we are creating wealth for our family and generational wealth that will be passed down to our kids. But at the same time, we're also helping change people's stories and narratives here in Milwaukee. And we're really trying to be really good landlords and communicate and take care of our properties well. So that way, like we're hopefully helping people now too. It's also slowly becoming a lead source unintentionally, but like, you know, a lot of these people who are renting need to buy houses. And so like getting to do buyer consultations with some of our tenants is also super exciting and rewarding. So
there's one question in the chat.
Yeah.
Wondering where most of these properties are.
Yeah, good question. So ours, about half are in Bayview, half in River West, and then we have one out in Silver City, so near Miller Park. Good question. Yeah, and they are all duplexes. If we buy a single family, we flip it and sell it to help fund multi-units, but there are some investors that only do single family. So again, there's so many different ways to do it, but we're more in the 2 to 4 unit space right now. We have 1 3-unit and then the rest are duplexes. So by the time all of these are renovated and rented out, because some of these are in process right now, we will have 18 units. Okay, I keep doing that. Okay, so some quick definitions and vocabulary that you'll hear tossed around in the investing space. We already talked about passive income, what that means. A lot of people will talk about the 1% rule. This means it's a quick calculation that says, is this investment worth my time of looking at running the numbers more, trying to dig into it to see if it'd be a good investment. People say that it would be like if you purchase it, whatever the purchase price is, that your rent that you're getting back would be 1%. So if you buy a property for $100,000, you want it to be renting for $1,000, and it's just a month. And it's just a quick screen to say, you know, is this really worth digging into? We have found personally that the 1% rule doesn't work quite as well in Milwaukee because our property taxes are so high. So you have to, there's other factors, but it still can be a really quick screen and check, okay, if I put 25% down on this property, will it cash flow is really the question. Also with financing, we're gonna jump to financing real quick. With financing investment properties, it depends on the lender, because that could be a whole class in and of itself, so we're not gonna dive into that, but a lot of lenders do require 20 or 25% down, depending on the property. It depends if you're purchasing it in your own name and it's backed by Fannie or Freddie and it's on a 30-year note, or if you're going to be buying it with a commercial loan. And then there's also, like in the financing world investment, there's private investor money, and then there's hard money. And private money is like people you know, you have a relationship with, and you're borrowing money from them. They're the bank and you're paying them interest. So we've worked quite a bit with private money as we've been buying these properties. Hard money is people, like they're hard money lenders, and you're typically paying them anywhere from like 12 to 18% on their money while you borrow.
What percentage
Yeah.
do
So
people normally do, or you just kind of work that out?
you have to work it out. I've heard of people doing 6% to their private investors. We personally do 8%. I've heard of people doing 10%. So more like the 6 to 10 range to pay your private investors. Yeah.
Money you're able to do cash buy with?
Yes. Yeah.
Which is probably.
It's helpful. It is helpful. Oh yeah, so the question was, with private money, can you do cash purchases? And yes, you can. So that's how we've purchased quite a few of ours, is we borrow private money, and then when we're writing the offer, it's not contingent upon financing. Okay. And then, okay, jumping back to this list. So house hack is a term. I'm going to talk more about this too in the resources section, but there's this website called biggerpockets.com, and they have an online forum, and Marcus Arbach actually is like a rock star on the forums. So if you get on there, you'll probably see Marcus's name. And they also have a podcast, which that's how we started learning, was a lot of podcasts. Like we've probably listened to a couple hundred of their podcasts. And they have different investors on there telling their stories. And again, you'll hear there's so many different ways to invest in real estate. So I think that their podcast is a really good place to start. But they coined this term house hack, and house hack essentially means you're buying a 2 to 4 unit property. You're buying it with an owner occupied loan, and then you're living in one of the units, and your mortgage now is subsidized from the other units or paid for completely. So this is how we got our start. We bought a house hack duplex. We were living in it when we were in Milwaukee, and then we did Airbnb in the other unit. When we were gone, we were doing Airbnb in both units. And we still actually live in a house hack. We have a Polish flat, and we do Airbnb in our basement apartment in the summer months. And we're about out of that season of our lives. We are almost done with that. But it is a great way to get started, and it's a great way to get awesome loan terms. So especially for your young first-time home buyers who want to live in Milwaukee, this is a really good option for them too. I've helped quite a few clients do this method, even if they don't know if they want to hold on to it long term. It's a great way for them to get a lot of their housing payment covered while they save up for a single family home. Or, if you can get a 30-year loan with owner occupant rates And then after you move out, it's now cash flowing. That's a great way too to start your investment journey. So that's what house hack means. BRRRR is another bigger pockets term. The letters stand for buy, rehab, rent, refinance, and repeat. We'll talk over this a little bit more in depth during like the example deal I show you, because this is the method, the primary method that my husband and I use. So you buy a property that needs a lot of work, and then you rehab it, and then you fill it with tenants, you rent it out, you get leases in place, you take it to a bank, and then you refinance it, or you finance it if you paid cash on this at the beginning. You refinance it, and then you do a cash out refi, so you pull money back out, and then you can go repeat it. So it's a way to recycle that money. So that's our method that we use, and that's how we've been able to scale so quickly, is because we're constantly recycling our money. So here, and we'll talk about that actually in the deal example. The cap rate is another term that you hear a lot. This is used more in the commercial investing space. And when I say commercial investing, that really means 5 units or more. Like that's when you would need to get a commercial lender to finance it if it's 5 or more. Cap rate means like it's your return on your money. So if you were to pay cash for that property, then your net income return is your cap rate. So if that makes sense, like it's basically your ROI on it without the loan counted. So without a mortgage, it would be your return on that investment. We don't use that as much because we are not in the commercial space yet. We use cash on cash more. That's more like your traditional ROI. What money are you putting in? What money is that kicking back to you? How hard is that money working for you? And what returns are you getting on that cash? And when you buy an investment property, the cash on cash, you count everything you use for the down payment and the rehab budget. So it's everything you have to put in on the front end, and then the cash flow you're getting back is your cash on cash return. So we'll go into the numbers too. Any questions there? Anything in the chat? Mandy, do you still see? Okay. Okay. So again, running the numbers can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different investors. Here are some core things that you would want to consider when you are running your numbers. So PITI, principal, interest, taxes, insurance, just like when you're helping clients buy a single family home and you're helping them figure out their monthly payment, you're also considering that when you're buying an investment property. You wouldn't have private mortgage insurance, because if you're using a bank or a private, if you're going to have to put down more than 20 or 25%. So you won't have PMI to calculate, but you'll still have the other pieces of that monthly payment. You'll also want to save for vacancy. So what happens if a tenant moves out and you then need to turn that unit around and get it refilled, and there's maybe a month gap in your numbers or in your rental income. Utilities and landscaping. A lot of the multi-unit properties here in Milwaukee only have one water main. And so usually it depends on the landlord. They pay for water versus dividing it amongst the tenants. Sometimes they say, okay, you pay this much extra for water. Sometimes it's just included in rent. I have heard of it being divided amongst tenants. It just depends on how you would want to do that. We just pay for it and include it in their rent. And so that's why it's in our numbers. Landscaping, again, that depends on how you do it. We do not budget for landscaping because in our leases, we put in there that the tenants are responsible for lawn care and snow removal, and they divide those responsibilities between the units. But if you have maybe a 4-unit or a 6-unit, then that would be a little bit trickier, and you would probably want to budget for snow removal and lawn care. CapEx just means any major capital expenditures like a roof or a furnace or if you're saving up for foundation repair, all of that. So every month we're setting aside savings for a major fix and kind of building up a property emergency fund for that property. Same thing, repairs and maintenance. Because we renovate our properties completely on the front end, we don't have to spend as much for repairs and maintenance, but we still save for it. And so we kind of have that emergency fund. And then property management, we self-manage. So we don't technically pay this to anybody else, but if you want it to be more passive, then you should run your numbers with property management included. We still run our numbers with property management because at some point we're either going to hire somebody to manage them for us or hire a property management company. So we want the numbers to work with that line item. And then if you're looking at a condo, some people specifically look at condos, then obviously include that HOA payment too. Yeah.
I don't know if you're going to test, but what percentage do you allocate for property?
I will get into that. Good question. So the question was percentage for property management. And I'll show you an example deal here. We typically save 8% for property management, but I've seen property managers here charge anywhere from 6 to 10%. So it just depends on the property management company, but we do 8. And then you'll see here all of our percentages. So this is an example of an actual purchase that we made. So there's 2 parts to this. And if you would like our calculator, I will gladly share it. Just send me an email and I will send you the Google Sheet. There was a basic version of this given to us when we first started, and then my husband likes playing around with Excel and it has evolved into this. So on the left side, you'll see there we have our BRRRR calculator because that's been our primary method. We just pop in numbers here. So we purchased a duplex in River West last year after it fell apart after the home inspection. That's how we've bought several of our properties that way after it falls apart. Because then we knew it needed a lot of work, but now the seller also knows it needs a lot of work after the home inspection. So we bought this one for $145, and with that, our numbers looked a lot better buying it for less, but we also always try to make sure that the seller is still being taken care of. You will find in investing in the investing community in Milwaukee, there are quite a few wholesalers. You may have also received phone calls or letters from them saying, we'll buy your property cash today. Some people have a whole business just with wholesaling, which is essentially a wholesaler is someone who comes in and says, hey, we will buy your property for this price cash. They get it under contract, and when they get it under contract, they put in there that they can assign the contract. It's assignable, and then they will go find a cash buyer, an investor, to purchase it. It depends on the wholesaler. Sometimes they do a double closing. Usually it's just one closing and they assign it. So whenever we're talking with potential sellers about buying from them directly off market, that is a conversation I always have with them. Are you getting these phone calls? Is that tempting? What are they offering you? And usually it's lower than the market would deem like they would be valued at, or what we would pay. So just know that's happening. There are some wholesalers that do it really well and make sure they're taking care of people. And there's some wholesalers out there who unfortunately take advantage of sellers in desperate situations. That also happens. So when we buy, we try to be super transparent. We tell them, here's what, especially as a licensee, there's some ethics there too, of hey, this is what I think it would sell for on the market. So if you're looking at selling it off market, because as realtors, we often can find off market deals. We just recently purchased 2 of ours off market. And so I had these conversations with them. Here's what I think it would sell for. Here's what we would be willing to buy it for. We could close quickly. You can leave stuff. We'll clean it out for you. And sometimes people are willing to take less for the ease of it. but we always want to make sure they have those choices. So this one, it was listed on MLS and they did have representation, but just wanted to say that because sometimes it's not on MLS.
How do you find them at MLS?
So that's a good question. The question was, how do we find them if they're not on MLS? Our first several were all on MLS. The last few that we purchased, my husband has this eye for spotting landlords when he's out walking. And so he was walking in our neighborhood and he started talking to some contractors because he was like, maybe they're like fixing it up to sell it. And they were like, yeah, you know, here's the owner, he's gonna sell it. And so he just was willing to sell it to us without listing it. And he was gonna FSBO it. That's another thing too, is you could look for FSBOs. There's a lot of like mom and pop duplex owners in Milwaukee, and a lot of them want to sell it themselves and they feel really proud to sell it themselves. And so we will try to work with them on that. Another one was someone who called me about potentially selling it and me listing it, and we were going that route. And then other people in her life were like, can you guys just buy it? Please just buy it, help her be done with it. So, but we really try to be careful to make sure that's her, you know, the seller's decision and that's what's best for them. So, yeah. Okay, so for this one, so the 14% at the top is our cash on cash return on this duplex after like currently today. So, but it technically is higher. We'll go into that. But when we bought it, it was 145. We put 70,000 into it. We financed this completely with private money. So we paid our investors 8% on their money, which you'll see down at the bottom, the financing cost of what we paid them. After repair value, that I probably could have included that on my definition slide. The acronym for that is ARV. So like when you're listening to podcasts, people will say ARV, that's after repair value. Once it's completely fixed up, what will it appraise for? So this duplex appraised for 285. This one's in the River West neighborhood. It appraised for 285. And then the amount that was left in the deal for us was just about 28,000. So if we were to buy a completely renovated duplex in River West, you know, then we're putting 25% down. And here we're putting just under 10%, or we're leaving that into the deal, right? So after paying our investors back and getting the cash out refinance, we left about 28 into the deal. And then this next part of the calculator, you'll see, this is how I also run numbers for my investors. So if I have an investor client who they're going to put 25% down on a duplex, then in the down payment line, I switch it to 25%. Since this was a cash out refinance on a 30-year mortgage backed by Fannie and Freddie, we had to leave 30% into the property and we cashed out 70. We also will sometimes work with a commercial lender where they'll let us cash out 80% and leave only 20% in. So we get more of our money back out, but the commercial loan terms are not as favorable as the 30-year loan terms. Okay, stop me if you have any questions about this. Yes.
One question that goes back to about your private investors is, where are you finding your private investors at 8%?
Yes, good question. So the question, should I repeat it?
You can just say Ginger's question.
Okay, Ginger's question is, about finding investors. So we've lucked out. Most of ours are relatives, and now we have other people asking to work with us, and we're trying to figure out with our attorney how to do that when it's like multiple people on one deal, because the investors that wanted to work with us initially, we were all related to, and they could fund an entire project. It gets a little trickier if you are funding only a piece of it, because when you fund an entire project, then we would back it against the property. So like if we were to default or something happens to us, on the promissory note that we drafted with them, here, this property would go to you if something happened. you know, but when it's multiple people, that's what we're trying to figure out. The risks are higher for someone putting in less money if it's not backed by a property. So we're trying to work that out with the help of our attorney, how to make sure we're all covered. Yeah.
And then for like the rehab,
Mhm.
how are you, before buying and before starting the rehab, how are you deciding how much it could cost to rehab? Because we always know, you know, things might cost more.
Mhm.
Is your husband doing a lot of the rehab? Is he handy? Do you have like a team that gets in there, gets it all done? I'm so curious how that goes.
Yes. Okay. So the question is about the rehab and how we know what it's going to cost, what to estimate. And that has been such a learning process. That is the most stressful part. That the renovation, there's usually a week or two in the process that we tell ourselves, why are we doing, or we question, you know, why are we doing this? And we still love each other? And, but then we, I know, he asked if he could get on. Hi. And then we also though say like, okay, if this were easy, everyone would do it. I also tell myself that as a realtor quite often. If it were easy, everyone would do it. And so the renovations, like at the beginning, we did a lot of it ourselves. And now just for the sake of time and scale, we are hiring almost everything out. And my husband is now managing the different contractors. And so it's really been trial or error. Like I could tell you several contractors never to use because we've had really horrible experiences. And we just keep thinking each time that happens, we learn from it and we do the next one better. So each renovation we've done has gotten better and better. We're getting better at estimating costs, but these old houses definitely throw us curveballs. So I'm very optimistic when I run my numbers. And so I'm like, oh yeah, that'll be 50,000. And my husband is more realistic and he's like, no, that's 120. I'm like, okay. So we go back and forth a lot and it's always a balance of like, okay, we want to renovate them really nice, but you have to keep that ARV in mind. Like in this neighborhood, so I pull comps, it's almost like I'm listing it, right? I'm pulling comps, I'm seeing what's the top end of this neighborhood. And so like using River West as an example, because we love investing in River West, like the top end of River West for duplexes is in that 285 to 300 range right now for a fully renovated duplex on the market. And so that's the number that we've been using in ARV. And then we want to work backwards from there because we want to be able to leave less than 10% into it. Ideally less. Like when you hear the bigger pockets BRRRR strategy, like there's a whole book on it. There's tons of podcasts about it. They talk about leaving no money into the deal. Like we have not figured out that magic yet. The only one that we've succeeded with that, well actually maybe two, are the two that we've done that with are our house hacks, because it's so much easier when you're house hacking a duplex to do it over time, and you can refinance it after a year or two. And so the market's also grown with us in that time, and we've pulled all of our money back out of those two. But when we're doing it quickly, like this one we turned around in about 7 months. And our last one we did in 6 months. And like when you're doing it that quickly, it's hard to pull it all back out. But yeah, so with the renovations, the contractors, now we have quite a few subs that we really like and trust, and my husband manages those. And then we have one contractor who is kind of like a carpenter, and he now that we have so many projects going right now, he told us he would just work our jobs all winter. So we're hoping to keep him around as long as possible if we can keep him busy. So if we were to create a team and like have contractors on payroll, he would probably be our first one. But as of right now, everyone's still an independent contractor. And so that's part of the juggling act too, of like how to get people to your job site in a timely manner. And then once you lose them, it's really hard to get them back. But we're slowly getting a good list of contractors. Yeah. That's a good question. Celia, did you have a question too?
Would you mind sharing the attorney you're using to track all of this language about, like, you were talking about creating like some kind of an investment fund with friends or other investors that want to put in smaller amounts of money?
Yes, so the question was about the attorney we're using. We've worked with, his name is Gifford Collins. He's in Tosa, and he's an estate and small business planning attorney. He also did our estate planning. So if you need an estate planning attorney, he's really good at that too. And then does a lot of stuff with businesses. So he's helped us with the LLC side. There's lots of, every attorney will tell you, they're probably supposed to tell you, just like we're supposed to tell our clients certain things. Attorneys will tell you like, oh, create an LLC for each property. We have not done that. That sounds like a lot of work and a lot to track. So Gifford is helping us move to like small groups of properties in LLCs, but we also have a really good umbrella policy for insurance for each property. And that's what we've heard is like the most important, because the reason you have an LLC is if they somehow max out your umbrella policy, then it would get to the LLC and then it would protect it from coming to your personal. So that's a whole other thing. Talk to an attorney. Yeah. But that's the one we use, Gifford Collins. Okay, so going back into this one. So the BRRRR calculator is like how we quickly analyze a deal. The 70,000, I think, like that's actually what we put in now. So now we're seeing it retroactively. We probably put in like 50 or 60, knowing like me being so optimistic. Now that we are hiring out more and more, like our numbers are increasing. Our last duplex, we actually put in, I think it was 110 or 115. We've started financing the purchases with a local bank here, and then using private money for the renovations. That's another thing that we've started doing just to scale, to try to make that private money go farther with the renovation side of it. So for this one, it reappraised at 285. So on the right-hand side, now you'll see like purchase price 285. And then the rent, that's what we're currently collecting in rent every month from that duplex, so both units. And then the rehab cost, that is, again, so this is the same calculator we use if we're running numbers on a property that we're not doing the BRRRR strategy for. So like if you were doing this with an investor client, or if you're buying a duplex that's in pretty good shape, but you're like, oh, I'm just gonna do a little bit of work to it and then get it rented out and not do the full BRRRR strategy, then the rehab cost, that's what you put like maybe 10,000 or 15,000 to fix a few things before you rent it out. And then this is a 30-year loan. The interest rate we got last spring when it was really low, which was great. And then we left 30% in. So even though we technically had to leave 28,000 of our money into the deal, we have 85,000 of equity in that house. So we really didn't lose any money. Like we created an excess of what, $55,000 of equity now that we've created in this property that's now in the duplex. And then these are the things that when we run our numbers, what we're accounting for, and you'll see the different percentages. You'll see like we put in the taxes, insurance. If you're helping a house hack client, that's when you would put mortgage insurance in there, because then with the house hack, you can put less down than if it's an investment property. We account for vacancy, utilities, CapEx, repairs, property management, all the things we talked about. There's zero HOA because it's a duplex. And then that is our net cash flow, that 331 number. We also are paying ourselves for property management since we're self-managing. And then this is really where the passive part comes in, because since this has been rented, so March 1st, one tenant moved in, May 1st, the other one moved in, we've gotten maybe 2 phone calls and a couple text messages. Like we like we have awesome tenants. We love them. If they call, like we'll definitely catch up with them, but like we just haven't had to go back and fix anything or manage anything. So when you start talking to people about investing in real estate, everyone will tell you a horror story of someone they know who like lost their shirt in the crash or had horrible tenants and they destroyed the house, you know. And it's kind of like when you're pregnant and everyone tells you the horror stories of someone else who gave birth. And so you just like, yes, do those exist? Yes. But it's not everyone's experience. And I think it does often depend on setting expectations and with your tenants and creating, like for us, we fix everything on the front end. And so we're not worried about things going wrong. And do they still sometimes? Yes. Like we don't fix it perfectly, or sometimes we've had contractors make a mistake, but our tenants contact us during the day. And like, I mean, one of the bold laws, right, that we talked about is you teach people how to treat you. And we tell them if it's an emergency, of course, call us anytime. But like most of the time, I've never gotten an emergency call, thankfully. So I take that back. Once with Airbnb. Airbnb is a different game though. That's a different thing. If you want to talk about Airbnb, we can talk about that another time. Airbnb is way more hands-on.
She wants to know how you account for vacancy.
Yeah, so we save 5% every month towards vacancy. So that way, by the time we have a turnover, we have money saved up for that rent that won't be coming in. I've seen some people do 7% or 8%. We sign year-long leases with our tenants, and so we know by the time, and we have a pretty strict like screening process for our tenants, and so we are not worried about them not having to pay or we've had one instance where some tenants needed help and we worked with them on that. So but besides that, like everyone's been able to pay, and a lot of other investors I know, even through COVID, like they were still getting rent paid every month. So it just depends too on like, on your strategy. Like there are some investors that we've met where they buy really, really cheap properties that still rent for pretty high amounts. So maybe like you buy a $30,000 property and you're renting it for $900 a month. Well, that's going to be a cash flow machine. That property is not going to grow as much in equity. And you might have other things that you'll be working through with that property, but it will cash flow. That has not been our experience. I would personally rather help that tenant buy a house so they don't have to pay $900 a month to live in a $30,000 property. But that is some people's strategy here in Milwaukee. Yes.
Sorry if this is dumb, but so like the projected cash flow is 331.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know, is anything above 0 like a success story, or do you want to see, you know, if it was even 200, you would have said winner?
Yes, good question. So the spreadsheet actually, I think if it cash flows more than like $50, it says winner. Like it automatically changes winner to loser.
Oh, right.
But if we can break even, like right after we refinance, we will still take that deal because we are pretty bullish on Milwaukee that the equity here is going to keep increasing and that rents are going to keep going up just relatively to where Milwaukee is nationwide. Like the percentage that people spend on their housing payments here is much lower. I shouldn't say much lower, but still a few or several percent points lower than other parts of the country. And so we feel like there's still lots of room for growth. So we've purchased properties when we first run the numbers that were like, you know, maybe we'll break even, like this one actually. And then we're like, well, maybe we'll break even for a year or two, but it'll be paying for itself. It'll be growing in equity and we'll still be getting that return long-term. But then by the time it's rented out, we're like, wow, rents have gone up. We got way more than we thought. And now it looks great on paper. But when we first ran the numbers, it's kind of a guess. We use a website. I think I I don't know if I put it on the resources page or not, called rentometer.com. You can pay for an annual subscription. I do because I also use it for clients and run reports for clients. So I just run it through my realtor business to pay for that. And if you put in an address and a bedroom in Rentometer, it will tell you the average and the median rental rate for that specific address in that area. And then you can do a deep dive into that report when you're a paid user on the website. And it actually shows you when was this place listed for rent, how many bedrooms, how many bathrooms, what was the address, and you can see other rentals in that neighborhood. So it's a really helpful tool when you're first running your numbers of like, okay, I think I could get 1,200 just knowing the neighborhood, but like I want to verify that. Then I would say rentometer.com. And they do give you 5 free reports before you have to pay for it. And yes, did I answer your question? Okay. Okay. Any other question about numbers before?
Yeah,
Okay.
another-
Yes.
sorry. So you get the private money,
Yes.
you buy a place, you fix it up, you do the cash out refinance, you pay back, let's just pretend grandma, with 8% more than she gave you. But you and your husband still own the house, and so you're buying and holding, but grandma's now gone, and you guys will, obviously, if you hold on to that for the future, you're never gonna have to like go back to the private investor and say, oh, now we sold it 5 years later, we made all this money.
Yes.
Or do you have to?
Good question. Okay, so the question was with private money, with private investors, are they involved after the refinance, after you pay them back? Right?
Yes,
Okay.
that is actually
So it just really depends on how you structure it. The way our private investors have won it, they don't want to own the property. Like they don't want at the end of the day, they don't want any piece of it. It's quick, easy return for them. It also depends on our investor, how we pay them. Some investors want to be paid every month. So while we're holding their money, we're paying them 8%, interest only. We have one investor who wants to be paid at the end. Kind of depends too on like tax year. Like right now, they want to be paid at the end, so it's not this year. It just depends on the investor and how you structure it. If the private investor wants equity, then they would need to purchase it with you. And again, talk to an attorney. It might be worth setting up an LLC, drafting a membership agreement, all of that. If you are buying a property with someone else, and you could, like, we've heard of people doing it where like you're managing the contractors and they're funding it, and that's the partnership, and now you're splitting up. Okay, like this happens in the commercial space a lot. In the commercial space, it's called syndication. And oftentimes like the deal finder and the deal manager, they are then bringing in all of these investors to have a piece of the pie, so to speak. And the deal manager, deal finder, say they get, sometimes it's 20, sometimes it's 30%. And then the investors split up the rest of the 70. So it just kind of depends on how you structure it. It's really common in the commercial space, especially with bigger properties. That's another whole way of investing in real estate, is investing in syndications. So if you're like, wow, Abby, it sounds like what you guys do is a lot of work, which is fair. Like if you want a more passive way to get started, like investing in syndications is a great way to do it. Like there's multi-million-dollar purchases of apartment buildings, and then you would get some equity in that as an investor. Sometimes, depends on the investment, they say that they want you to be an accredited investor, and that means that you have a net worth of more than $1 million. Then you can be an accredited investor and get in on those syndication deals. Some of them have lower points of entry, and now there's like different real estate investing websites popping up where you can be a non-accredited investor and still buy into different properties, and they're all sponsors on the Bigger Pockets podcast. So if you listen to the podcast, you'll get to hear about all of those. They are not sponsoring my talk today. So yeah. Okay, any other questions about the numbers? Okay, so a couple resources. I should have put rentmeter.com. If you want the slides, email me and I can send them to you. And I'll put Rentmeter on here too. A few books to get you started. We've read quite a few. A few of our favorites are Rich Dad, Poor Dad. That's really like how we got started on this whole journey. It's a pretty easy read too, because like the first half is like story. It's like a story. Cash Flow Quadrant is by the same author as Rich Dad, Poor Dad, but just is like almost like part 2. And I think Cash Flow Quadrant is really helpful regardless of how, both books, Rich Dad, Poor Dad and Cash Flow Quadrant. If you're like, I want to grow my passive income, not sure exactly how, both of these books are great for that, because he is talking about the mindset. Like Rich Dad, Poor Dad is really more of a mindset book than it is technically an investing book. And Cash Flow Quadrant, I would say, is more of like a big picture strategy book. Like there's 4 quadrants, and one of them is being self-employed. So it's like, yep, we're on the treadmill. If we get off, it stops. But then you want to move to the quadrants that are B for business owner or I for investor, and like how to keep your money working when you are not working. So those are both really good for, again, for more mindset or big picture as you try to figure out what form of passive income you kind of want to go for. Like, again, the BRRRR strategy is probably one of the more hands-on forms of getting it going. And then once it's rented out, it becomes more passive. There's also a book, it's one of the Bigger Pockets books. It's called Long Distance Real Estate Investing, which is it's all about a more passive approach to doing it, because you're doing it from out of state. So when we were managing Airbnb from overseas, we had to do it pretty passively because we weren't here. And now that we're here, we tend to be more hands-on. And then it's a good reminder every time we go on a trip, like, okay, we need to put more systems in place to help start to remove ourselves from this. So even now that we have a contractor just dedicated to our jobs, like my husband doesn't have to be the one that runs over when something is needed right away, because we already have someone working on the properties and he can go do it. So we're slowly removing ourselves more and more from it. The ABCs of real estate investing is a really good overview of commercial real estate. If you're like, I don't really want to mess around in the 2 to 4 unit space, I want to start bigger, that would be an awesome book to start with. And then Evicted is a book, confession, I have not yet read it. It's been on my list. My husband has, but what's interesting about it is it tells those stories of people who are being evicted, and from both the perspective of the tenants and the landlords, and it's actually based on people here in Milwaukee. So we've talked about it a lot, even though I haven't officially read it. But it's a good perspective to have. We really try to, even when we inherit tenants, when we purchase a property, we really try to work with them so that like when we just bought, like we're not asking him to move out in the middle of winter. Like he'll move out in the spring and we'll renovate the vacant unit first, and then he'll move out in the spring and we'll renovate his unit. So we really found that like if you treat tenants with respect, you communicate clearly, you give them some options, they usually will work with you and be reasonable as well.
If they have a lease and you buy the duplex, let's say, and they have a lease for another year.
Mm-hmm. Good question. So the question is, what if the tenants are currently in a lease when you purchase the duplex? And the answer is that that lease continues. So if it's rented out for the next year, in one ways it's nice. You don't have to put any more money into it and you'll be getting income. But if it's really under market rent, then it's a bummer, because, you know, if you pay market price for the property, but now it's not being rented out at market rent, you can always like amend the lease, but there's different like like obviously both parties have to agree, and the tenants wouldn't be obligated to change anything. But there's a term called cash for keys, where you essentially buy out their lease to get the keys back and amend it. So you could buy them out. Yeah. And so I've talked about bigger pockets a lot. Milwaukee, this is also great if you have a client who is going to buy an investment property in Milwaukee. I've had a lot of my clients take the free landlord class. I believe it's still virtual. And it's like a half-day class, I think. And it just gives you a really good overview of what the city really cares about and what they're tracking, and like the city inspectors. That's a really good class to take too, just from a like code perspective, what they're talking about, thinking about. There's also a Milwaukee Real Estate Investor Association, so the Milwaukee REIA. That's a good network of people. They have a lot of different types of investors investing in a lot of different ways, but all mostly here locally. And then also, I didn't put it on here, but yeah, Rent-A-Meter. And then our leases we get from Wisconsin Legal Blank. We heard about them through the Milwaukee Landlord class, but it's this website where you can download the leases or you can buy them and they'll mail them to you. And they're all written by attorneys, all the documents. And so our leases are Wisconsin Legal Blank. So we do not draft our own, we just buy theirs and use theirs. Yeah. Any other questions?
You just answered it, so I was wondering maybe your leases.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. And if you want the slides or if you want our spreadsheet, just send me an email and I'm happy to share it. Yeah.
Also, rental market, do you usually get like multiple applications whenever you have any openings?
Good question. So the question is, how is the rental market? Do you get multiple applications? And yes, we do. It's really hard to find tenants in the winter. So this winter we were more strategic and we are now doing our renovations through the winter months, but we have tenants moving in tomorrow actually. So, I mean, when we have a unit that's done, we post it on Zillow typically. We collect applications through Zillow and through apartments.com. You can have them pay for a credit check, background check, all of that through both websites. And then we put an open house time, because you will find that potential tenants can be very flaky and they will say they will meet you at a place and never show up. So we just say, here's this open house time. We put it in the rental listing and then we direct everybody to it. And then the last couple we've done, like we've gotten several applications per unit. So I feel like it's very hard to find housing right now, also in the rental space. And so the demand is pretty high. And yeah, we were able to fill.
Zillow at rentals.com?
Apartments.com. It used to be called Cozy, and then apartments.com bought it. And then apartments.com is actually what we've been using too to collect rent every month. So our tenants get set up on there, and then they can set it up to connect it to their bank account, to connect it to a credit card. They can set it up on auto pay. So it just happens every month now. So we try to put those processes in place because, again, once it's renovated and rented out, we want it to be passive. So, yeah.
Abby, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're
The
welcome.
chat is blowing up with great thanks.
Oh, good. Thanks everyone for joining. I can't even see my video, so hopefully I'm like in the middle of it. Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you so much. That was great.
That was easy. My husband will start talking about bigger pockets. He listens to it nonstop. Are talking about the Spur strategy. So actually, I told him to come on this call. He's